Six Nations Show on OTB Sports Radio.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
It's spinning! It's spinning!
Updates, analysis and opinion across all OTB channels from start to finish.
Got on it!
I've never seen a team like Ireland before.
This is OTB Sports Radio.
OTB Sports Radio. The Six Nations Show.
Hello, good afternoon to you all, and you're very welcome along to episode 4 of our Six Nations show here on OTB Sports with me, Neil Treacy. It's Scotland week, the penultimate round of this season's competition, and Ireland finally up and running after their win against Italy in Rome a couple of weeks ago. But this is going to be a much bigger step up in class. Away at Murrayfield on Sunday afternoon, Scotland, remember as well, they haven't played in almost a month after their game against France was postponed. And we'll certainly be talking about that as well, don't worry. Get your comments into us across all of our social channels as well. We're live streaming at the moment. We'll try to put as many as we can to our panel. Joining me are the two Johnnies today, because we've former Munster and Leicester Tigers winger and head coach of Naas Rugby, Johne Murphy. And for the Scottish perspective, and maybe a French one too, delighted to have former Scotland back row on loan from the day from Le French Rugby podcast, Johnnie Beattie. Thanks a million for joining us, guys.
Pleasure.
Cheers,
nice to be here. Nice to have. Thanks. Cheers.
So just to figure something out with the names, I think we're going to have to do something, because, you know, I can't do eye contact with you, unfortunately. How does, like, Murph Beats, how does that sound for the afternoon?
Magic.
Yeah.
We'll work our way with that. I made the bookings for this, and then I just realised afterwards how confusing it's going to be. It's one of the problems with doing all these things over Zoom. But just to start, guys, obviously a bit of breaking news this morning that we probably have to touch on, because the Six Nations agreed a deal which we all expected was going to be happening at some point, but their deal with the private investment house CVC is completed, a 14.3% stake in the business over the next 5 years, which will be worth various amounts to the various unions. For the IRFU, though, it's going to be worth €56 million. The partnership being framed to further develop the men's, women's and under-20s championships and autumn internationals for the wider rugby community. One consequence of the agreement, though, is the likelihood of the Six Nations going behind a paywall, as the IRFU Chief Executive Philip Brown put it this morning. Put in the context, today's announcement comes against the backdrop of record losses for the IRFU in the last year of some €36 million, and similar ongoing significant revenue losses expected this year. The initial funds in real terms received from this deal will simply deliver the funding required to keep Irish rugby going for little more than a month. Johnny Murphy, we expected this was going to happen for some time. Is it going to be good for the game?
Well, I suppose CVC, their history has been, pretty good in general in terms of their investment. And you would hope that, I suppose, the baseline is this is badly needed for all the home unions. That the revenues that they've lost because of COVID have been astronomical, and I think it's just really important to get this in. It would be disappointing to see it go behind a paywall. I saw something this morning reading about it, that a Six Nations game from an Irish perspective is up there with All Ireland final day, with the amount of people that view it. So from that perspective, if it did go behind the paywall, the viewership certainly will drop. But where we are at the moment, it's very welcome, the funds, and it keeps the game going for a while. I know he says only a month, but it's really important that those funds go into the union and filter down throughout the whole game.
Yeah, Beats, I suppose maybe 12 months ago we probably could be quite philosophical about this and just look at it as the impact it was going to have on numbers watching the game on free-to-air TV, whether it's RTE over here or BBC and ITV in the UK. But with all that's gone on in the last 12 months and the astronomical amounts of money that the various unions have lost, it's hard not to look at it and see it as a badly needed cash injection at just the right time.
Yeah, it's just disappointing of the timing. I think from conversations with Scottish Rugby, there were loads of excitement around how that money was going to be used. If you rewind 12 months pre-COVID, investment, growth of the game, how can we broaden ourselves, how can we make it more interesting to get more youth involved and develop as a rugby nation? Those were the targets and the aims for the money that was coming in. That now obviously has been thrown by the wayside. It's like, how do we save our business? So a very distinct change in how the money will be used. And then the TV paywall, like you look at other sports like Formula One, things that have gone behind paywalls, the participation rates. Already in rugby, there's a concern with concussion and injuries and people not getting their kids involved in the sport. The next worry is if it goes behind a paywall, as is most of professional rugby already, Six Nations is something we've all enjoyed for free for all of our lifetimes. If it goes behind a paywall, our participation rates for youth rugby are going to fall off a cliff. So look, there's loads of different things, loads of moving parts happening at the same time, but the most important thing is how do we get kids involved in our game and grow it? Because ultimately that's how it's going to survive.
So you think it's pretty much inevitable that if it goes behind a paywall, you will see a knock-on effect with the amount of youngsters actually taking up the game?
Of course. I think that's a sort of a guarantee in all sports that have gone behind paywalls. You look at the example of Formula One and interest rates, viewing numbers, it fell off a cliff. So we've been extremely lucky to have it on RTE, BBC, ITV, free to air forever. And now if it goes behind a paywall, take for Sky Sports, for instance, you lose a massive % of your free to air viewership. And that's the issue that that's the biggest stumbling block that's going to come in. Yes, CVC money is going to come in to commercially boost the different unions and the federations. But is that money directly going to be taken back out to encourage young kids to get back into the game in schools? So that's the balance they're going to have to find, but it's not going to be easy.
And Johne Murphy, like speaking from your point of view as someone who's heavily involved in both the club game and the schools game in Ireland at the moment as well, are you prepared to be taking on this challenge now of trying to figure out what are the things you'd have to do if it does go behind a paywall? Obviously, we don't know for certain yet, but I suppose what do you have to do to attract more and more people to the game?
Well, I think it's really important that participation levels in Ireland had started to drop already. So we have to figure out a way. And at the moment with COVID, there is a big danger, not just in rugby, but all sports, that people don't come back to the game. Teenagers are going from screen to screen to screen, and their parents are struggling with getting their teenagers out exercising. And when there's no competition or nothing for them to kind of target themselves as, it's very difficult. So we were in a situation where we have to try and get numbers back up. And after the first lockdown, there was huge return to sport. But this one has been so long, it's going to be difficult to get them back. So we're already fighting a potentially losing battle. But I think it's really important from a community perspective that the club gets out in the community, shows what an asset it is to that local area. Being as inviting as possible, and then trying to deal with the issues that Johnny has already spoke about around injuries, and really try to show that player welfare is at the height of every single coach, every single player, every single union. It's their main focus, and obviously there's been a huge amount of red cards over the last probably 6 weeks. Six Nations, you look at what's happened in the Premiership and Pro 14 over the last couple of weeks, but there has to be an adjustment overall, that when parents are looking at this, looking at our game, that they feel it's safe for their kids to go out and play. And I think local club roots have a massive part to play in that. And I think it's an opportunity to get people back to their clubs, even though it's going to be difficult. I think it's an opportunity to show that how valued part of the community that rugby clubs are.
Yeah, we're at an opportunity, I think, where there's a fork in the road, and it's about making sure you pick the right path to travel down. Let's turn our attention though to the games coming up this weekend, which is what we were here to talk about today. No team news, obviously, yes, Johne Murphy, but I suppose looking back on Ireland's last game out against Italy, where they got their win, they blew off the cobwebs a little bit. We probably expected it was going to happen, but they took a few more risks than they had in the game against the games against France and Wales to start off with. Do they have the courage of conviction now to take those risks against far better opposition?
I would say so. I think how they played and the pace and the intensity they play in it seems to be another. They need to now go out and put it against a really quality side. It is going to be difficult, but I think it's something that they have to show and they have to try. Going back into themselves and playing more conservatively, I don't think would be a step forward. It might be a bit more pragmatic to try and stop the Scottish threat, but you can see that hopefully they can do that defensively. But from an attacking perspective, I think their want to try and get their arms free, to throw that offload, to move the ball, the quickness of the ruck ball that they had was probably the quickest it had been in a long time, and hopefully that's the catalyst that can just give them a lot more confidence to really push their multi-phase game over the next two fixtures.
I suppose the big risk to it as well, though, is that Scotland do have individuals like Stuart Hogg and Finn Russell who, if you are going to be taking those chances and if you're not clinical with them and you make some sloppy mistakes, their counter-attacking game is so good you will be punished.
Yeah, their transition game is probably, you know, up there with France's in terms of, if you do make a mistake, how quick they are to move the point of contact and get it into the likes of you know, Hogg and, you know, Van der Merwe's hands, and they do punish your mistakes. So I think it's trying to be clinical and having that. The difference is, you know, having that want to throw the offload, but then the knowledge of and the composure to do it at the right time when it is on, and having that clinical edge to it. But I think more importantly, it's their conviction to play. It's to try and keep the speed of ball where it was a couple of weeks ago into Italy, and just really see that want to play a bit more than they had in the previous couple of games.
And Johnnie Beattie, I'm curious to get the impression of Ireland from an outsider, because I think we're like in this country, there's, I suppose like all countries, there's a bit of a media bubble where there's the same narrative running around, and the general impression here, it's been quite dreary kind of coverage over the last couple of months of the succession plan with the Irish team, things like, you know, who's coming through at out half, the style of rugby Ireland have been playing. I'm curious to see what the impression of what Andy Farrell has been doing with Ireland for the last year is outside of Ireland.
I think generally the view is sort of similar to the one that people have of Welsh rugby. I think from the outside, people have viewed you as quite spoiled in that you've had Joe Schmidt and Wales have had Warren Gatland. So you've had two of the best coaches to come up and grace the Northern Hemisphere over the past 10, 15 years. And your level of play and your style of play has been second to none. I think what people note now is that you're going through a phase of transition. You're working through things with Andy Farrell, who is in no way or shape at all similar to Joe Schmidt in the way the backline plays. You're nowhere near as prescribed. It looks much more tentative, like you're trying to feel things out, as opposed to building blocks, which were so hard to break down. I mean, that was the thing about playing against Ireland for years, was you would hear murmurs and moans, or there's no offloads, or you don't pass the ball out of contact, but it was impossible to get the ball back from you. It was impossible to play against you because you were so well organised. Well, look, it looks now that you're a little bit looser, for want of another word. The style of play is slightly looser. The back line looks half step slower because everything is not pre-prescribed. And that makes it more difficult. It's been criticism of players. But for me, it looks like the style of play doesn't suit a couple of the guys, or it slows things down a half second. And that's where the criticisms come in. So, look, I would say clearly you have had a wonderful coach for the past decade. You're now in phase of transition, a new coach. Things are taking time to settle in. He's new to the job as well. Like, he's come from a defensive role, which is the simplistic coaching role as an assistant that every team has. So look, he's feeling out this role. It's the first time he's had it as a head coach, which is a huge role, trying to figure out how he wants to attack, working through his teething problems, his exit plays, everything. He's never done it before. So look, it's going to take time. But undoubtedly, you have this pool of players from your systems and your provinces that is incredible. So look, I'm not worried for you. The pool of talent is there, but I think on that top level, the Irish team is going to take a little time to find its click and to get going and get started. Because look, you've had such a raised standard to play for so long, but it's just teething issues is all I see it as.
Murph, it is interesting to hear that kind of take from an outsider. Like, I suppose we don't consider ourselves to have been spoiled over the last probably 8, 9, 10 years. because of our World Cup record and, you know, the 2 quarter-final defeats. But I suppose when you look at the Six Nations titles and stuff, they've been thereabouts almost every single year.
Yeah, I think so. And there was always going to be this element, like, you know, previously when you went into camp with Joe Smith, there was plays on the wall on a Sunday evening. You had to know by Monday morning where you were running, and if you didn't get that right, you knew you were going to be in trouble. Where you know, listening to you know, a few different commentators over the last while, it's very clear that Mike Catt is a lot more player-led and a lot less structured in terms of his multi-phase attack, and wants players to push the boundaries a bit. They're completely opposite. So to try and even meet in the middle from a playing perspective, it can be quite hard. There's going to be an adjustment period to that, and I would have, look, I have always been an advocate of Mike Catt, even from my time in England when he coached London Irish and he was player coach. I really like the way that he likes to play, and I think that it will take time. I think Ireland will eventually get back to where they were, and that's competing for Six Nations more or less every year.
And Murph, then the team obviously isn't going to be named until tomorrow, so there probably will be a few changes, more than likely from the game against Italy. You'd expect like Cian Healy coming back in at loose head. A couple of ones up in the air that we're a bit unsure about. I'd like to get your thoughts. Does Conor Murray come back in for Jameson Gibson Park if he's fit enough to start? And what about Jacob Stockdale? Is he good enough to break into that back three at the moment?
I just firstly on Stockdale, I don't think he's probably up to the form that he has been, and you know, he's kind of on the back foot. So for me, he probably doesn't make it. Potentially the bench, depending on what kind of makeup they're looking at. From a scrum half perspective, I do think he sees Conor Murray as his first choice. And then it's down to what he decides from a head coach perspective. Generally, some head coaches, like if someone is first choice, they come back from injury, they get a right to reply. So I don't know. For me, I like Gibson Park coming off the bench. I think he can control a game. He's very composed, but he can also really test teams around that, you know, around close quarters defence, around the ruck, and bring players into the game. Slightly different to how Murray does. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Conor Murray start with Gibson Park dropping to the bench.
And Beats, of that Ireland squad, obviously we don't know it exactly yet, but what areas of that squad would you be worried about as a Scottish fan, and then what areas of the squad would you kind of be licking your lips at that you think Scotland could take advantage of?
Look, there's nothing exactly to lick your lips over. Like, there's a few really impressive guys. Byrne is a guy that's come up from Llanelli. His provincial form and his form for Ireland has been monstrous. Paul O'Connell was singing his praises last week. He's a guy that sort of dark horse potentially for a British and Irish Lions spot as well. But look, I think Johnny kind of hit the nail on the head early, and he was talking about the pragmatic way of approaching this game. I think, look, the level is as such now with all these teams in the Six Nations that you have to feel your way into it and take your opportunities when they come to you. Like, for Scotland to live in this game and exist, they have to achieve parity at line-out time, maul time, scrum time as a forward pack, and then see what happens. If they can get into the right areas of the game, strike when they get a chance, and convert once they get into a red zone. And I think that's going to be the same for Ireland as well. Look, there'll be a bit of feeling each other out. You go back to the loss for Scotland in the fourth playoff for the Autumn Nations Cup. There wasn't too much in it, but in the end, Ireland ended up running away with that game at a canter. So, look, I think there's a few lessons that have been learned about the way we approach our games with Ireland. We've run from deep in the past and run down dark alleys and been turned over and looked foolish. You go back 5-10 years, we've been bullied up front, which I think no longer happens. So there'll be a few fine details that make the difference in this game. It'll be a case of who takes their chances when they get them and managing to convert those opportunities.
On Scotland's squad at the moment, Beats, obviously since that game against England, like, they have lost a couple of numbers along the way, like Xander Fagerson's suspension. Adam Hastings is suspended as well out of the wider squad. Cameron Redpath was excellent on that day, and you know, he's been out injured as well since. Do they have the depth in the squad at the moment, or is that something they're just slowly building towards?
Look, we're obviously never going to have the depth that other sides have. We've got 2 professional teams, which is half of the rest. You look at Wales and Ireland and what we're up against. You look at England and France, where you go down to England, there's more registered referees in England than there are rugby players. That's the scale of what you're up against. It's ridiculous. We're going to pick up injuries along the way, but we're lucky now there's a little bit of depth. So yes, we lose Fagerson, who's been excellent, but you can bring in Cy Bergen or WP Nell, who've both been outstanding tight heads for us in the past couple of years. There's that little bit of depth coming. So as much as those key men would have been a massive issue in the past, it's not now. We're also fortunate, obviously, we're federation controlled, so we're not sending players back to play for clubs in the fallow weeks. You look at France this week, they've lost both Leroux and they lost Villiers in the Racing against Toulon game. So we're lucky that we have that element of control as well, which you also have in Ireland, that we can protect some players. But I think the general feeling will just be, it was such a buzz to win at Twickenham for the first time since 1983. They'll just be desperate to get back together and get playing. They were so disappointed not to get a chance to play France in Paris, and it was postponed. But that's meant there's been knocks. Have had a couple of weeks to recover. They'll just be chomping at the bit. They've been training like absolute Trojans, waiting for this next game, and I guess they just can't wait to get back out in the field.
Yeah, and that's the depth in the squad. But on the blockbuster players, Stuart Hogg and Finn Russell, I might just play a clip here. This is of former Scotland captain Andy Nicol, who was on Wednesday Night Rugby with us last night, speaking about Russell and how the Racing playmaker has added so much variety to his attack.
Probably helped. COVID actually came at a good time for Scotland and the relationship between Gregor and Finn. And he's gone away. He's realised that international rugby is really important, and how you conduct yourself coming back from a big club like Racing is you've got to come back into how that team environment is. And so I think he's the complete standoff at the moment. It's great to hear Johnny Sexton. You could almost sort of hear the pride in his voice, because there's the respect from one standoff to another. And Finn Russell's got it all at the moment. He's got the variety in attack. He's got the kicking game, probably the best kicking game in the world rugby at the moment. The variety of kicks as well. The short kicking, long kicking, everything like that. But what was really pleasing, I guess, from a Scotland perspective, was that we won at England, we won at Twickenham without Finn Russell playing that well. He actually, he had a couple of moments and he had a couple of great things, but he didn't have his best game. And so there's more to come. And that's where, when you've got a backline now that Scotland have, there's other threats. And that makes Finn Russell even more dangerous, because it used to be the case, and we mentioned it earlier, if you want to stop Scotland playing, you just cut out the source. They cut off the source to the ball getting out to Stuart Hogg, and that meant you're closing down Finn Russell. There's players around him. When you've got players like Cam Redpath, I don't think is going to be back this weekend, but James Lang is a good player at 12 as well, and Chris Harris, as I say, has been really well. Finn Russell loves defences coming to him, so he can offload, and these guys can play off him. He doesn't mind that. He loves the physical side of it. But when you've got nobody to offload, nobody creative to offload, then that's when you can see how teams have been able to really stop Scotland playing. So Finn Russell is playing very well in a better team. And that is always the case. You need players around you to allow somebody like that to show off his talents.
Stuart Hogg's in the form of his life as well. I mean, at Twickenham, he was absolutely ridiculous.
Oh, I mean, and so we've got that added dimension that he's playing for Exeter, so Scotland don't control him throughout the Six Nations, and Hoggy went back to play for Exeter last weekend. Well, that's good. Hoggy, he thrives on playing. He wants to play. He's one of those players, he just gets better the more he plays. And obviously we were, fingers crossed, he got through unscathed injury-wise, and I think that he had some ice at the end of the game, which was a bit concerning for Scotland fans, but I think he got through okay.
Yeah, Finn Russell and Stuart Hogg, I suppose, the two players that everyone's looking at the moment. Finn Russell, go back 12 months, he's out of the Scotland squad entirely. Like, as Andy Nicol said, COVID came at a great time for them, because it allowed them to kind of manufacture and mend the relationship between himself and Gregor Townsend.
Yeah, I think what people fail to realise is how similar they both are as blokes and as players. Like, you chuck around words like mercurial, talented, misunderstood, gifted. I mean, they're both the same bloke. They just don't realise. And that's why it was so funny to watch the scrap from the outside and hear little bits and bobs what was going on behind closed doors. But look, it's just great that it's mended now. I think as well, Finn also has to comprehend that his tutelage and the way he's come through as a 10, it's all been learned from Gregor. Gregor was his coach from year dot at Glasgow. His vision of cue, the way he's developed his his vision of play, the way he's developed his rugby IQ and his heads up rugby and his identification of space has been because of Gregor. And that's why Finn is able to operate at such a high level. He's got fantastic spatial awareness, decision making. He plays at a ridiculous level week in, week out for Racing, the top 14 with Vakatawa outside him, pulling the strings, being his second set of eyes. And look, I think everybody just wants that next step, that level, to see a little bit more consistency in that decision making in high-end games, pressure situations, and pushing Scotland to the next level. You've obviously got Hoggy that can fill in as a second receiver. They quite often play two sides attack, and it must be hell of a scary now when you look up. It wasn't the case in years past playing against Scotland, but now you look up both sides of the pitch. If you get to middle of the field in the ruck and you've got two-side attack, one side being led by Stuart Hogg, the other side Finn Russell, you think, geez, it's tough going. So look, we're really lucky and blessed that we've got those two blokes leading us in an attack sense at the minute. They've been tremendous for their clubs and had wonderful success over the past couple of years. And then now it's just a case of, look, can they take that next step and nudge us onto a bit more consistency in a blue jersey and a few more wins?
And Johne Murphy, like the word leadership was used a few times there over the last few minutes, particularly with Stuart Hogg. Is he growing? Are we seeing him now having grown way more into that leadership role in the last 12 months?
I would say so. I think that's probably, his move to Exeter and what he's part of down there. But like, he's playing at a level that, I'm not sure any other 15 in the home nations is playing to. He's electric. He's very secure. He's got a massive boot, and he's really adding something, as Johnny said, to controlling that other side of the breakdown and having that two-sided attack. For me, the Scottish backline is I think it's underrated. But like, when you look at it, like their first backline, Hogg, Maitland, Redpath, Harris, Redpath, Van der Merwe, I think is someone that is playing really, really well. Russell and Price, their last backline was, Hogg, Graham, Harris, Lang, Van der Merwe, Russell and Price. Like, they're excellent players, and they have a bit more depth, which gives them more options across the pitch. But I think it's very clearly led by Hogg. And the best thing for me about Russell is, Russell could throw an intercept pass and someone go the length, and then a minute later he chips and chase and offload to someone and they score under. It's mistakes don't affect him in any way. He's back on it, and he's just, I'd say he's so hard to mark, especially against rush defences, because his chip and his kicking game is second to none. When you have a blitzing defence, that can be very that space in behind the front line, in that triangle, can be very hard to mark, and he has the kicking game that can really expose that.
Beats, one thing I did want to ask you about as well before we get verdicts on this game. Obviously, when the sides met last December in the Autumn Nations Cup, Ireland 31-16 winners back in December. There were some quotes from Eddie O'Sullivan which didn't go down too well in Scotland at the time. He was on duty for RTE. We've been asking a couple of Scottish pundits about it this week as well. Rory Lawson was discussing it the other day, and Andy Nicholl yesterday. But this is what Eddie O'Sullivan had to say about that game after Stuart Hogg had done his post-match interview, where he had said he thought Scotland had controlled most of the game. He says, "We've seen all this before. They always talk themselves up. They always talk a great game. They have some deluded notion that they're better than they are. I'm not being harsh. These guys haven't won here in 10 years. They've won 3 times against Ireland in nearly 20 years. It's just deluded. They talk themselves up. They come in and then they implode. We've seen this time and time again." Now, I know from at the time, I know these didn't go down too well in Scotland. What would your overall thoughts be on that?
So interestingly, I was watching in the south of France on a mate's illegal television, and we're watching RTE coverage. So I got to see it live. And I have to say, part of it I agreed. When you understand the context of what was said, so Hoggy said we dominated for 70 minutes, and I was watching it going, we clearly haven't dominated for 70 minutes. But I just loved how irate Eddie got. It gave me a laugh after a couple of years in the south of France. Look, statistically, we haven't at all. But in the context of the game, we clearly didn't dominate for 70 minutes. But Hoggy, new Scottish captain, still licking our wounds after getting absolutely pumped at the World Cup. I think it was Jaco van der Walt's first game at 10, trying to be positive, heading into a new Six Nations, a few lessons had been learned, but that was, again, it was a stopgap, a bloke's first test. You're trying to be positive afterwards. I think it was just too positive in the spin he was trying to put on it. But if you look at the little lessons Scotland have learned, I feel like they are on their own little journey. They maybe were a bit too expansive in the World Cup. They got penalised and punished against Ireland at the World Cup. The sort of debrief after the World Cup was, look, let's be a bit more pragmatic in our approach in our half, or certainly our third, and let's just look to spring our surprise and our chances when we get into opposition half. And I think that was kind of the journey that Hoggy was trying to get at. They did actually spring a few decent launch plays and put Ireland under pressure and stretch them. They just couldn't convert in that Autumn Nations third, fourth place playoff. But look, I had a good laugh with Eddie's comments and he got panned absolutely everywhere. It was brilliant. But to a certain extent, he's correct. Like, statistically, we haven't been at the races. Last time I won Ireland was 2010. A wonderful memory. But look, if we're going to get better and have that kind of conversation and be able to talk properly, consistently, we have to be better when we play against Ireland.
And did you enjoy those comments specifically because he referenced the last time you won in Ireland where you scored the only try?
100%. That's the nail on the head, of course.
All right, guys, verdict time for this Sunday, Scotland against Ireland. Johne Murphy, I'll let you go first. What way is it going to go?
Very tight game, but I'll go for Ireland by 2.
And Beats?
I think Scotland to hopefully put a dent in some of those statistics and start their own journey. So I think it's going to be tight as well, but I'm going to go for Scotland by 4.
They talk themselves up. They always talk themselves up, Scotland, don't they? Listen, I do want to get a few thoughts on England against France. Very quickly, I'm just going to run through the teams because they were announced today. England side, Max Malin's making his first start at full-back for England. Anthony Watson and Johnny May on the wings with Henry Slade and Owen Farrell in the centre. George Ford then at out-half with Ben Youngs at scrum-half. In the pack, it's Maka Vunipola, Luke Cowan-Dickey, Kyle Sinclair in the front row, Maro Itoje and Charlie Ewells in the second row with Mark Wilson, Tom Curry and Billy Vunipola among the back row. The France team then, they have a few changes. Verimi Vakatawa is back into the starting 15 while Roman Ntomak is fit again. He's only available for a place on the bench, but in full they've Bryce Doolan, Teddy Thoma, Verimi Vakatawa, Gail Ficku, Damien Penaud, Matthew Jalabert and Antoine Dupont in the backline, with Cyril Bay, Julian Marchand, Mohamed Hawass, Roman Tafafanua, Paul Willems, Dylan Cretton, Charles Olivon and Gregory Aldred making up the 15 there. Johnnie Beattie, though, obviously the French COVID outbreak is something that's dominated the headlines over the last couple of weeks. You've been well on top of it, I know, from listening to Le French Rugby podcast. France investigated it, found that, unsurprisingly, Galtier did leave the bubble, but they decided he didn't bring it back into the team. Not to mention Wafflegate as well. And it now seems that the players themselves aren't really too happy with the way this has panned out. This has all the potential to lead to the type of French rugby civil war we've seen in the past, and we thought we had left in the past.
But the thing is, they're now well coached. As much as they might not be the happiest bunch of campers, you don't want to play against French blokes when they're upset because they're so emotional and they'll take it all out on the pitch with them. So, look, it's been an absolute mess, to be honest. And I think, obviously, the fact there's been an internal investigation after it was the French government that said, look, we don't want teams playing in the European Cup. That's all cancelled because that doesn't align with what we want to do. But then ultimately, they then screw everybody by bringing COVID back into their camp. And it's the head coach that everybody sort of assumes it's Fabian, but nobody says it. So, look, it's been a mess, but you just want them to perform on the pitch. You want them to put it all behind them because, look, the 12-month journey that they've been on and the difference in the standard and quality of French rugby that we're seeing is phenomenal. What we've seen in the Six Nations so far, what we saw in the Autumn Nations Cup last year, for the Six Nations tournament for World Rugby, I think it's just great to have a French national team that's back firing. So I'm hoping that this COVID will just be shoved to the side, forgotten about, and they can get on and perform and do something special at Twickenham.
And obviously a massive boost as well, Johnny Murphy, with Vakatawa back fit in particular.
Yeah, massive. I'd be the same. I think they've a star-studded lineup, and that with aligned with being really well coached, it's it's a dangerous mix. I think they could potentially put a score on England this weekend, if they get it right and they channel their frustrations correctly. I think they're certainly the team to beat at the moment.
Are England primed for a breakout game, guys, or are we going to see a little bit more of the same that we had in the Scotland match and in the Wales game a couple of weeks ago?
Do you know what I just find really frustrating? I think it's fantastic to see Mallins and Luke Cowan-Dickey come into the side, but the Six Nations tournament clearly is gone for England. It was a chance to make wholesale changes, and Eddie keeps banging on about, only 70% of this squad is going to make the World Cup in 2023, but we never see the other 30%. So it's a chance. You could have had Ollie Lawrence, you could have had Simmons, you could have Dogwood, the winger. You could have had all these guys in to see what they're made of and test them at Six Nations level, but we don't get to see them. So I just think it's a missed opportunity from the English coaching staff to bleed a couple of extra new players. Like, to change 2 doesn't really change that much. I think they could have done a lot more personally.
Yeah, and Johne Murphy, the out half situation was probably the most staggering one. Is, we've been talking about our succession plan at out half for so long, and I know England obviously their age profile is better with Ford and Farrell, but I don't know, did you see the statistic during the rounds last week of ever since Eddie Jones took over in 2016, of his 62 test matches, this will be 63 this weekend, only one out half has started one test match across those 5.5 years. That was Danny Cipriani for one game in 2018. Every single other game, either Ford or Farrell has started out half. I know age profile is probably on their side with the two of them, like Owen Farrell turning 30, Ford still in his late 20s, but that's a worrying statistic.
Yeah, I think so, and I think I completely agree with Johnny. They could have brought guys in. The English public are crying out for someone like Simmons to come in, and the form that he's in. He's kind of said, couldn't mess with the bubble too much, but everyone is on testing systems, and if he wanted to, he could have in reality. Marcus Smith is playing really well for Harlequins at the moment, and he's certainly worth a go. I don't understand where he's coming from with not giving guys a go, because it's a shot to nothing for 2 weekends, and it was certainly, I think it's an opportunity missed for them to build, and maybe he's hoping that the Lions goes ahead and a couple of those guys are gone, and he can really blood a lot of players during the summer. But that's a bit of a gamble, because no one really knows where we're going with what's going to happen with COVID as we go on. So, particularly around the Lions. So it's going to be an interesting one to develop, but look, that's their problem, and it hasn't really gone well for this Six Nations for them at all.
Can you see them cutting down on the penalties, Johnnie Beattie, or is that actually a real problem?
Look, I think every side in world rugby knows that if you give away more than 10 in a game, you're asking for trouble. It's just part and parcel of pro rugby. You know that if you give away field position 10 times, or you give away shot at the posts 10 times, your chances are you're going to lose the game. The crazy thing for me was, if I put myself in the position of Itoje in that game, and I know if I give away one penalty in a game, that's my one. I've given it away. If everyone else gives away one, you're at 15, you lose the game. It's simple as that statistically. So if they're giving away 5, there's a real issue with the leadership group that they haven't said to him, like, mate, get back in your box a little bit, calm down. I know you like to play on the edge, but we can't all live like this. Otherwise, it's just suicide. So, look, I'm sure they've had a massive debrief on the Monday morning. There was so much that was lackadaisical, people not having heads up for cross-field kicks, for people taking quick taps under the post. They just weren't at the races for one reason or another. So I'm sure they've had a complete rocket on the Monday morning in the review, and I don't think we'll see that again from England side. It's not possible. You just can't exist at a pro level, let alone international level, against the quality they play against. So hopefully it'll be the last time. What's the verdict for this weekend, guys? England and France?
I think France by
how many, Johnny?
By 9.
By 9. Sorry, yeah, you just cut out. Perfect. And Johnnie Beattie?
Yeah, strangely, I'm confident as well. Yeah, about the same. I'd say France by 8 or 9, 10 points. I don't want to say comfortable and give them the kiss of death. But look, I'm enjoying the way they're playing. It's been fantastic for the tournament, and England have been poor. And it was their chance to bleed some young guys. I would have loved to have seen Don Brown in there as well, but he's not going to get a chance again. So look, I'm going to back France again and say by 10 points. Just have one last question here. This is a message in from a listener on our YouTube stream, Johnnie Beattie, around the lines as well. Johnny Gray currently in the running for a starting Lions position, ? I would just like to follow on to that as well with how many Lions do you think probably Scotland are deserving of at the moment compared to
how many do you think they'll be rewarded with by Warren Gatland? Because they do seem to have a bit of a fractured relationship with the Lions over the last 10, 15 years.
Well, look, Warren's always challenged us, which I've enjoyed. He said, look, the only way Scottish boys are going to get on this plane is if they can show that they can win away from home. So for the first time in 40 years, since my dad was playing the last time we beat England at Twickenham, scarily enough, we've done that. There's a monkey off our back. So I'm hoping that might break some sort of this relationship down, and maybe a couple more and it might sneak on a plane. Look, Johnny Gray, he's been wonderful for Exeter as well. I also really enjoy watching Cummings, his second row partner, who I think has been outstanding for Glasgow. I find it hard to pick between the both of them. But look, for me, there's a few guys, Finn Russell, Stuart Hogg. I really enjoy watching Jamie Ritchie, Hamish Watson, but the competition for back row places is as fierce as it's ever been. So look, I don't think it's going to get any easier, is the honest answer. There'll be a few guys, certainly. You really got hope he takes Finn Russell, Stuart Hogg, and then hopefully 3 or 4 others. So look, that'll be a better representation than the first round picks that we got last year. But I'd say if you could get 5 or 6 boys on the plane, that'd be a good step in the right direction.
All right, guys, it's been a pleasure having you. Johnnie Beattie from the French Rugby Podcast and Johne Murphy. Thanks a million for joining us this afternoon.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Now, before we finish up, I will just rattle through a few more messages that have been coming in throughout the show as well. Apologies, we didn't get to put as many as we wanted to the two Johnnies. But some of the messages coming in, how crucial will the scrum be this weekend? Scotland's scrum has been quite solid over the first few games as well. Rory Sutherland gave Ireland a bit of bother as well last season. Toto Rock says, how good have Gary and Robbie been this campaign? Despite our struggle, those two have been solid. Gary still needs to see a change of style to get the best out of him, but currently he isn't doing anything wrong. I think most people would agree with you there, Toto Rock. It seems to be the absolute first choice centre partnership at the moment after probably 3.5 years of flittering between Bundy Aki, Gary Ringrose and Robbie Henshaw. I know on a lot of cases injury and suspension had contributed to the first two that were being picked there, but it seems now that all three have been fit over the last couple of months that it is Gary Henshaw and Gary Ringrose and Robbie Henshaw who've been selected. Is this the first time since the 90s that Scotland are favourites, says Sean 96. I was wondering myself, Sean, I probably would have actually thought Scotland were marginal favourites. According to the bookmakers though, Ireland are actually just narrow favourites for the game this weekend, but I'd probably be leaning on the side of Scotland, just with the home advantage. Stephen Wall, granted they've not won anything yet, but in terms of player quality, this must be almost one of the best ever French teams, and that's saying something. Certainly one of the best potentially one of the best French teams we've seen for a long, long time, Stephen. And then Terminus Est, Ireland probably have the best team in the Six Nations, and we'll take Scotland game to prove that. He also follows up and says, and France are excellent, of course, but England still likely to beat them with a great team returning to fitness. That's going to be a tough one. Our two guests, the two Johnnies, both picked France to win that one, and with Virumi Vakatawa back, I'd probably be in line to agree with them as well. Now, that is all we have time for on the Six Nations show this afternoon. I will just very quickly run through the table heading into this weekend. So as we can see there, Wales leading the way, still on course for the Grand Slam. They're playing Italy on Saturday afternoon, and you would expect they will win, leaving a Grand Slam decider against France the following week. France in second place, although they still have played one game less than Wales, Ireland, England and Italy. Ireland back in third place as well. So that's how we're set up on the table. And the fixtures this weekend, starting out 2:15 kickoff at Stadio Olimpico in Rome for Italy against Wales. That's followed by Le Crunch at 4:45 at Twickenham, England taking on France. And it's a 3 o'clock start at Murrayfield on Sunday afternoon, where Scotland are taking on Ireland. That is it for this Thursday's episode of the Six Nations show here on OTB Sports. If you missed any of this, you can play it back on our video streams on YouTube or on Twitter, or we'll have this podcasted later on the OTB Sports app. A reminder as well, all our rugby coverage on Off the Ball is brought to you by Vodafone. Team of us, everyone in. Keep an eye out for more rugby as well over the coming days as we build up to that game at Murrayfield on Sunday afternoon. Alan Quinlan will be along as usual on OTB AM tomorrow, and we'll have Mike McCarthy giving us live updates throughout the afternoon on Sunday as well. We will be back on the Six Nations show for our final episode of the season next Thursday, same time, 12 noon, and we'll speak to you then. Bye now.
The Six Nations Show on OTB Sports Radio.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone.